Could it be that hidden within this simple description, the answers to the skeptic's most difficult questions may be found? Having served as director of one of the United States Defense Department's major research and development laboratories, Dr. Walter Brown comes with an impressive list of credentials and credibility. In tackling the subject of Earth's geological development, Dr. Brown has developed a theory that contradicts the generally accepted viewpoint of the scientific community. Profound and far-reaching, this respected scientist's hydroplate theory not only offers a completely new approach to the geological sciences, it succeeds where the prevailing theory often fails. It simply and logically explains most profound mysteries.
We can see on our planet 25 major features that can now be systematically explained as a consequence of a global flood that erupted from subterranean chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 30 trillion hydrogen bombs. This theory shows us just how rapidly major mountains form. It explains the coal, oil, and methane deposits, the rapid continental drift, and why on the ocean floor there are huge trenches, hundreds of canyons, and tens of thousands of volcanoes. This theory also explains the ice ages, and it gives the primary reason for global warming. It explains the formation of the layered strata in almost all fossils, the frozen mammoths, and major land canyons, especially the Grand Canyon. Surprisingly, it explains the origin of comets, of asteroids, and of meteorites.
According to Dr. Brown's theory, the ancient world that Noah lived in was very different from the Earth we occupy today.
Noah and other pre-flood people probably lived on one very large supercontinent with lush vegetation, inland seas, and major rivers. The mountains were smaller than today's, perhaps 6,000 feet high. Before the flood, about half the Earth's water was in interconnected chambers, about 10 miles below the Earth's surface. This formed a thin spherical shell, almost a mile thick. The pressure in the subterranean chamber had been increasing for centuries because the gravity of the sun and moon produced tides in the subterranean water that lifted and lowered the Earth's massive crust twice a day. This tidal pumping added gigantic amounts of energy to the subterranean water. This increasing pressure in the subterranean water steadily stretched the crust as a balloon stretches when the pressure inside increases. Failure in the crust began as a microscopic crack that grew in both directions at almost 3 miles per second. The crack, following the path of least resistance, encircled the globe in about 2 hours. As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying rock crust opened up like a ripped and a tightly stretched claw. So the water exploded violently out of the rupture. The Bible even gives us a precise date. The 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open. Then it says, and the rain fell. The fountains of water jetted supersonically into and above the atmosphere. The spray from these enormous fountains produced torrential rain such as the Earth has never experienced before or after. The supersonic fountains eroded the crumbling rock on both sides of the widening crack. This produced huge volumes of sediments that settled through the floodwaters, trapping and burying plants and animals, forming the fossil record. Eventually, the crack became so wide that the newly exposed floor of the subterranean chamber sprung upward, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball. The continental plates, with lubricating water still beneath them, slid downhill away from the rising mid-Atlantic ridge. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of approximately 40 to 50 miles per hour, they ran into resistances, and like a runaway crashing train, they compressed, crushed, buckled, and thickened, rising out of the floodwaters. This is why the major mountains are generally parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. Today's major mountains were all pushed up in hours. The hydroplates, in sliding away from the mid-Atlantic ridge, opened up very deep ocean basins into which the floodwaters retreated.
This theory of a massive worldwide catastrophe in antiquity appears to support the biblical story of the deluge in every detail. But what other evidence exists to support this amazing theory?
In 1970, I predicted that large pools of salt water would be found beneath major mountains. That prediction has been confirmed in several ways, by gravity studies, by seismic studies, and by electromagnetic studies.
A paper published in the April 2001 issue of Science magazine announced the discovery of an electrically conductive layer under the Tibetan Plateau. The article suggested that such high conductivity at depths of approximately 10 miles could be achieved by a layer of aqueous fluids, some 1.6 kilometers thick and containing 10% brine. In other words, salt water.
Just how big these subterranean layers of water will turn out to be, no one really knows, but the article points out that the conductivity is evident across the entire Tibetan Plateau.
Recently, even more evidence to support Dr. Brown's theory became available. On March 22, 1998, a group of boys playing basketball in Monahans, Texas, narrowly missed being struck by a 3-pound meteorite that crashed to the ground 40 feet from where they were playing. The police were notified, and 48 hours later, NASA scientists cracked the meteorite open in a cleanroom laboratory. What they discovered inside stunned them all. The meteorites contained salt crystals and liquid water.
The NASA scientists who investigated this meteorite believe it came from an asteroid. That's unlikely, because asteroids in the vacuum of space cannot sustain liquid water, which is required to form salt crystals. It's also too cold, and there's too little gravity. Earth is the only body in the solar system that can sustain liquid water on its surface. This demonstrates the enormous power of the subterranean supercritical water, the fountains of the great deep, that launched water and rock fragments into orbit around the sun. These rock fragments are still returning to the Earth as meteorites. Meteorites contain Earth-like material, including many types of living but dormant bacteria. This means that meteorites and their bacteria didn't originate in the vacuum of space. Meteorites are literally tiny chunks of the Earth itself returning home.
Scientists are also scratching their heads over another recent discovery. On the Kola Peninsula in northern Russia, they have created the world's deepest hole, extending to a depth of 7.5 miles. At this depth, what they expected to find was a layer of basalt, Earth's most common type of volcanic rock. What they actually discovered was something entirely different.
The hole didn't reach the basalt underlying the granite continents, but to everyone's surprise, they did reach hot, salty water flowing through crushed granite. Geologists are mystified, but the hydroplate theory provides a simple explanation.
Did the springs of the great deep burst forth and flood the entire Earth, just as the Bible says? Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory offers us a plausible scientific explanation for how this may have happened. But is there something more important to this theory? Could it be yet another example of the supernatural engineering observed throughout the Bible? If we now know where the water of the Great Flood came from, the same water that was instrumental in forming the fossil record, then when the Great Flood receded, where did all the water go? The answer to that question not only bolsters the scientific theory that a worldwide flood actually took place, it also provides an alternative explanation for the formation of one of the world's greatest natural wonders.
This is the question that stops most scientific investigators dead in their tracks. Yet the hydroplate theory makes the answer obvious. As the hydroplates crashed, they thickened and rose out of the water, forcing the floodwaters over the continents to recede. Simultaneously, upward surging subterranean water was choked off. As the floodwater drained off the continents, every continental basin was left brimful of water, producing many post-flood lakes. During the following centuries, some lakes breached their boundaries by either spilling over their rims or undercutting their banks. The rapid, catastrophic discharge of these lakes, much like the collapse of a large dam, carved canyons. Several centuries after the flood, two very large ancient lakes, Grand Lake and Hopi Lake, sitting on top of the high, rising Colorado Plateau, breached their boundaries and carved the Grand Canyon in just a few weeks. The massive canyon was not carved by the relatively small Colorado River over millions of years. That river is a consequence of the carving of the Grand Canyon.
Can the residual waters of Noah's flood account for the amazing natural beauty of the Grand Canyon? If Dr. Brown's theory is correct, then the Grand Canyon was carved only a few thousand years ago, and nearly every geology textbook needs to be rewritten.
One has only to look at the Earth's anomalies to see that the hydroplate theory provides a far better explanation of the Earth's present condition than the other more prevalent, well-propagated, but highly implausible theories.
Were key geological markers, like the Grand Canyon, formed over millions of years? Or did they come to be within the short time frame of Noah's flood? The hydroplate theory, which supports the story of Noah's flood, says it was the latter. If that is true, what better example of supernatural engineering could one ask for?
There's another sort of 5 or 10 minutes of it which goes through some amazing evidence. Now the thing is this, when he first came up with this theory, he was basically saying that there was water, a layer of water underneath the Earth's crust, where in the past we've said there's magma that's underneath the Earth's crust, which there most certainly is. But he was saying that 10 miles down, he believed that one day we would discover that there is water there. And this is pretty mind-blowing, because sometime after that, so this is in the year 2009, the Daily Telegraph reported about vast oceans laying beneath the surface of the Earth. And just a few days ago, so this is in, what's the date on there? I can't remember. 13th of March 2014. If you'd bought the Mail, it would say this headline: revealed the vast reservoir hidden beneath the Earth's crust that holds as much water as all the oceans. That's there right now. Much of the water has sunk back into the Earth. There is not enough water right now to cover all the mountains, is there? Quite obviously, because there isn't. Where did the water go? Much of it drained back down again. So you can see, this was in the same paper, they've put like this model here showing exactly what we've just seen that was discovered a number of years ago, that there's all this water still there now underneath the Earth's crust. Now it isn't going to explode out again, but as it says there, scientists have discovered a vast reservoir of water under the Earth's mantle they say could be larger than all the oceans combined. Now if we add that to the oceans, and if we lower the mountains down to around about 5,000 or 6,000 feet, there's now enough water to cover all the mountains on the Earth. And more amazingly, as he pointed out there, it explains all the geographical features that we see on the Earth. It's unbelievable to imagine that a mountain could be pushed up in hours. It is bizarre to think that. But the forces that were happening on Earth enabled that to happen. In fact, I'm sure you've all seen this, but this is Pangaea. And it doesn't take more than a young child to realise that all the continents look as if they were once joined together, doesn't it? Have you seen that? So here's South America. It looks like it fits into Africa here. And in fact, what they've done on here is just joined all the land masses, and lo and behold, they all fit together. This is what the world looked like before the flood. And incredibly, the oceanic ridges that now split in between the continents and go round, actually you can see other things. That's where the seam ripped. You know, when he showed the lines going around the Earth, that's the seam that ripped. And it pushed them all apart. And they travelled at, fantastic speeds. As he said, 40 to 50 kilometres an hour. It pushed it apart. Such was the energy that was released. So, it did happen. Now, we weren't there. But this is one heck of an explanation. Hydrotectonic explanation, and more people have started looking for evidence of water under the ground since that, and now suddenly there's headlines in the press that say, actually, do you know what? There is water, oceans of it, water, oceans of it, deep under the ground. There is, whether you go along with that theory or not, how does anybody explain these fossils on the top of the Himalayas. These are little mollusky type of things. What are they called? Ammonites, fossil ammonites. These are marine fossils. They're found at the very top of the Himalayas. In fact, every single mountain on Earth has got some sort of marine fossil. Now, I don't know whether you've stopped and thought about fossils, but if an animal dies and it gets buried naturally, does that turn into a fossil? No, it doesn't. It corrodes. The bones and everything disappear. Everything biologically breaks down, even the bones. What is it that causes the fossils? All of the fossils are created by, well, 99% of them are created by sedimentary rock. And sedimentary rock is where water has gone over and sediment, lots of it, has dropped down upon the animals quickly and buried them. And that sediment then solidifies around it and the fossil is formed. All the fossils that we read about nowadays all come from that period of time. The dinosaurs, these creatures that we see, there's a sea fossil found in the Sahara Desert. There's some amazing fossils that are found. This fish here, can you see, has got a fish actually inside it. Now, the digestive system of a body, even if it was to die, continues to operate and would actually have digested that fish, but the sediment has come down and just frozen it instantly in time. All of this came from the flood. This is another one. Look, this is a fish actually eating a fish. And as it says on there, fossils all over the world show evidence of rapid burial. Many fossils, such as fossilized jellyfish, show by the details of their soft fleshy portions that they were buried rapidly before they could decay. A global catastrophe like the flood explains the fossils that we're just used to seeing. So, right, there was a flood. It was worldwide. God says there was, and in his mercy he explained to us even how it happened. The fountains of the great deep exploded and erupted up, and then it rained. It's exactly what happened. But what about the ark? Could the ark have worked? Well, what does God say about the ark? Have a look at Genesis chapter 6, verse 14 to 16. So, well, have a look at verse 13. God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me. The earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. And this is the fashion which thou shalt make it of. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, the height of it 30 cubits. A window shalt thou make to the ark, and a cubit shalt thou finish it above, and the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof, with lower and second and third stories shalt thou make it. So this immense structure was detailed out by God. Now, what we can now do is convert the cubits into feet and inches, or if you wanted to, meters, but I can't do meters. The young people can sort that one out for me. So I'm talking about feet here. In your terms, guys, this is 1.5 football pitches long. That's how long it is in our terms. It's 437 feet long by 72 feet high by 43 feet wide. It was 1.4 million cubic feet inside. This is a big ship. It's an enormous ship. Now the questions that we might say to ourselves is, well, there's the dimensions. Would this thing float? There's an interesting Babylonian record of the flood which says that this man called Nuh built a boat that was 120 by 120 by 120. It was a cube. And is that going to be stable in the water, I ask you? How many ships do you see floating around like a perfect cube? Not that many. How many ships do you see floating around like that? Lots. Now, here is just an amazing thing. The ark had got perfect dimensions. See this boat here? This boat was built, it was the largest boat ever built at the time, built by Brunel. You heard of Brunel? English builder. Now, he built this boat here on similar ratios. It was called the Great Britain, this boat, and it was 322 by 51 by 32.5. The Ark was 300 by 50 by 30. And Brunel was going on all the experiences of shipbuilding to calculate the perfect ship, because this was the biggest thing that they'd built at that time. The Ark actually was still bigger. The Ark was bigger than that, but he had built it using almost identical dimensions to back in Genesis chapter 6. Now, how did Noah know the perfect dimensions to build a super tanker liner type of boat? Absolutely incredible. Noah got it right first time. And it's only in recent years with computers and technology that we can really work out exactly what can be built. Now, of course, with the advent of steel, people were now able to make bigger boats. And you realise something, that boat there, built in 1885, is the first time on planet Earth that anybody built a boat bigger than the Ark. How amazing is that? That's the boat, built in Scotland. Until then, Noah's Ark held the record for being the largest ship ever built. And of course they've got bigger and bigger now, because steel is different to wood. We can push things out and grow the Titanics and so on. But isn't that amazing? The dimensions. So it isn't, if God had said it was a cube, we'd all be sat here laughing and saying, well, no, it's ridiculous. If God hadn't said that the mountains had been lowered and the valleys, we could have laughed and said, well, it couldn't have covered Everest. There's not enough water anywhere to be able to... But he didn't. He said, actually, no, I lowered it and pushed it up. It's absolutely astounding. Now, this is also mind-blowing, and maybe all this is coming out because of the film, I don't know. But this is in the Daily Telegraph, and this was on the 3rd of April 2014, so this is like a couple of weeks ago. I open up the Telegraph. It says, Noah's Ark would have floated even with 70,000 animals. These people, scientists, have been doing research to say, what is the capacity, how many animals could he have taken on? And there's all the science down the left there, which blows my mind. People can work out exactly the structure, exactly the weight, exactly how many animals, the average size of an animal, and so on and so on. And in a minute, I'm going to show you exactly how many animals needed to go on this boat. And it's nowhere near 70,000. 70,000 it could have coped with. It didn't need 70,000. The other thing is, and again, this is scientists and mathematicians who've calculated these things. Well, did Noah have enough time to build it? How long did Noah have to build the Ark? 120 years. He was given 120 years. You know that because it says somewhere about the 120 years. I can't remember exactly where, but anyway, we'll find it in a minute. 120 years. Now, what these people have calculated is, if there's 4 men who sort of know what they're doing, how many cubits of wood could they actually attach and build a day? And they work out how much strength the man's got and how much time and how much this and how much that. I mean, it's incredible how they work all these things out, but they do. And they've calculated that just 4 men doing a meagre, which they say a very small amount, this is like, you know, they've got the afternoon off almost, they would build it in 65 years. So God says you've got 120 to put this thing together. In 65 it's done. And maybe in a lot less than that. But 65 is a serious overestimate as to time that it would have taken to build this. It's a massive thing for 4 people to build, no shadow of a doubt. But there was time enough to do it. So what about the animals then? What was going on with the animals? Have a look at Genesis chapter 7. Verse 1 says, the Lord said unto Noah, come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by sevens, the male and his female, and of the beasts that are not clean by twos, the male and his female. Now, there's a lot of confusion, I think, about this as to exactly how many animals was God taking in. Was it of the clean ones he was taking 7 pairs? So modern versions say 7 pairs. So that's 14. And it wasn't 7 pairs. The Hebrew doesn't say 7 pairs. It basically says 7 by 7. And it says the unclean were 2 by 2. Not meaning that there were 4 elephants and 4 giraffes. There was 2 elephants and there were 2 giraffes. But when it came to the clean creatures, God said take 7 of them. 7 by 7. You'll see lines of 7. 7 sheep followed by 7 ox. And the reason for that is, what did Noah do when he came off the ark? Does anybody remember? He sacrificed. And what animals did he sacrifice? The clean. It says, I sacrifice to you all the clean. And so God says you can have 6 of the clean animals. The 7th one is for me. It's exactly like the days of creation. 6 days for man, on the 7th day is for me. I've rested. So there weren't millions of animals needed. It wasn't all multiplied up to such a large extent. But how many animals physically had to go on the ark? So we've got capacity of 70,000. How many do we need? Well, here's what we need. Now this is somebody called Ernst May. He is the leading American systemic taxonomist, which means somebody that classifies living organisms, okay? So this guy has basically detailed all the different kinds. So God says take different kinds into the ark. There are 3,500 mammals. There are 5,500 reptiles and amphibians together. So he doesn't split it out. He puts amphibians and reptiles together. And there's 5,500 of them. There's 8,600 birds. And we don't have to worry about the fish. Why don't we have to worry about the fish? They don't have to flap onto the ark, do they? No, no. So what we've got there is a total of 17,600 of these creatures. But now we've got to double that up, haven't we, for all the unclean. So now we're going to say, well, at the very least, we're now talking about roughly 35,000 animals. We've filled up half the ark. And then we've got to add in the clean animals, because they're multiplied up by 7, not by 2. But there's hardly any clean animals. You can list the clean animals from Leviticus. There's probably about 12 of them. So there's hardly any clean animals, really. So it makes not an ape of the difference, really, to the capacity of the ark. There's loads of room in the ark. Loads of it. How amazing is that? So, here's another thing. There were 3 stories built within the ark, and just have a look here at Genesis 6 verse 14. I don't know if your Bibles are still open around about there. This is fascinating. People have said, wait a minute, this is ridiculous, taking a bunch of animals onto the ark. Well, okay, maybe they could fit in, but they're all going to start killing each other. They're all sort of eating each other. How do you feed them all? And how does all that work out? And there's an amazing clue as to what actually happened here in chapter 6, verse 14. Because God said, make thee an ark of gopher wood. And it then says, rooms shalt thou make in the ark. Now in my Bible I've got a little mark next to the word rooms. I don't know if you have. Has anybody got a little mark next to the word rooms?
Yeah.
What does it say?
Compartments or nests.
Nests. Do you know what? This word in the Hebrew is used 13 times in the Bible. 12 times it's translated as nest. This is the only time it's translated as room. God said, make some nests. Make lots of nests. Now, what lives in nests?
Birds.
Birds, and what else would you say would live in a nest? Obviously, there's lots of different animals here, not just only birds. So, what do you find in a nest?
Babies.
Babies. It's the young that you find in a nest, isn't it? And God says make lots of little nests. God didn't take the giraffe that was fully grown. He didn't take the elephant that was fully grown. He didn't even take the sheep that was fully grown. Why? Take them as young and put them in their little homes, in their nests. And now suddenly the capacity of the ark is even bigger, because most people have assumed that they're taking full-grown, mature creatures on, but they didn't have to. They could be young. And that reduces the size of animals down much, much more. And in they go. And almost certainly, because it's described as a nest, they were into some sort of hibernation, sleepy sort of state. But there was plenty of room for food in there, as well as packing in the animals. And so inside the ark would have looked, I don't know exactly, but lots and lots of smallish compartments, and on we go. Now the other question is, well, okay, maybe we can imagine Noah is able to build an ark. Yeah, he's got the dimensions, he finds the wood, he's obviously pretty handy with a hammer and a saw. He's done that. But you're telling me that he can round up animals 2 by 2, some pretty ferocious, some others. How's he going to do that? Thank you, God. Thank you, because once again he explains how that works. He says, do you know what? God always says, what you can do yourself, I want you to do. What you can't do you know what? I'll do it for you. You can't get rid of your sin. So I tell you what, I'll sort that bit out for you. You can be baptised, you can go under water, so that's your deal, that's what you've got to do. God always, always says, if you can't do it, I'll do that bit for you. He's amazing. And look what he says here, of the fowls after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing of the earth after his kind, 2 of every sort, shall come unto you, Noah, to keep them alive. Thank you, God, you've explained. You might have lost me, possibly, if you hadn't have said that. How could Noah have done it? You've explained.